Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about our top 10 Dynasty sleepers who benefit most from the 2025 NFL Draft.
Hike!
In this episode, this will be a consensus top 10 list that Joe and I came up together on. And we're going to be talking about players that in the event that these teams do not address these, what we feel as positions of need, these players are going to benefit the most, and these sleepers are going to rise up like cream to the crop. So, Joe, let's talk about the first guy. Who is that player that we're thinking could rise if they do not address the position?
Yeah, our first player is going to be running back Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you're talking about, Najee Harris moved on in free agency onto the Los Angeles Chargers. He had 263 carries last year, over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. He also had receiving game-wise, 48 targets, 36 receptions, 283 yards, no receiving touchdowns. So, as you can tell, there's a lot of volume left to be had at this running back position for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And you're talking about Warren, played 15 games last year. He had 120 carries himself for 511 yards, 1 touchdown. Also had some receiving work, 47 targets, 38 receptions, 310 yards, no receiving touchdowns as well. So it'll be interesting, especially, potential change of quarterbacks. I think that also could improve the receiving numbers a bit, and maybe we get some receiving touchdowns as well for the Steelers running back room.
Yeah, and at this point right now, we've only seen Kenneth Gainwell be added to the running back room, and Jaylen Warren and Gainwell play very similar roles. And Warren has been very explosive in his time in Pittsburgh. So, again, based on the nature of this episode, in the event, more than likely, do the Steelers draft running back? You would think that they would, but you never really know. And so if they don't, then Jaylen Warren is the one who would benefit the most. And honestly, in this episode, we're going to be talking about 10 guys that we think are really interesting. If you want to, gamble a little bit and go acquire these guys, knock yourself out. You're going to, you could really probably get some decent bargains right now on some of these players and all these players. And if it so happens that those teams don't address that position need, then, hey, you're going to have a viable player in your hands. So, this is more so to keep it on your radar, but I think Warren would definitely benefit greatly, and he would really have a great opportunity next year. So next guy we're going to be talking about here, I'll talk about this one, Joe. It's going to be wide receiver Malachi Corley. Malachi Corley was a player who I know I was pretty excited about, but really didn't play all that much. Only played in 9 games, had 6 targets for 3 catches, but the Jets team has completely changed. You got Davante Adams, only played, he's going to be leaving with 114 targets, and you got Tyler Conklin, who had 72 targets, and then Allen Lazard, a guy who had 60 targets. There's been rumblings that he wants out of New York. So you're talking about a lot of targets that are going to be vacated. Now you got Justin Fields as the quarterback. Malachi Corley, who was used to, I think he was called the Yak King. If you look at that depth chart, they don't have that much behind Garrett Wilson. Where are these targets going to go? They've got Xavier Gibson. They got Lazard, who might not even be on the roster. And then they've got Malachi Corley. So to me, Malachi Corley's got a great opportunity.
Yeah, he really does. And, he had a really disappointing rookie year, but he was a guy that I was interested in the draft process and as far as Dynasty goes. I know you were as well. So I hope that, he gets a chance for an increased involvement and the Jets give him a true chance to see if he can exceed and do something. Like you said, he is considered the Yak King and should be an exciting player.
Not to mention 3rd-round draft capital, too. So, it's not like this guy was a 5th, 6th, 7th-round pick who has to really claw his way into the starting role, which we do see happen. But, he wasn't able to get on the field. Maybe, with Rodgers, maybe Rodgers and him, he wasn't a Rodgers guy. And as a result, he just never saw the field. And it could very well be possible, but Rodgers kind of was the one who pulled the strings.
Yeah, and Rodgers, he's the type of, he doesn't really trust rookies. And if you are not on the same page with him or not putting on the, in the work with him, you're simply just not going to get the opportunities.
No. So if the Jets, for whatever reason, do not draft a receiver, I think, Corley has one of the, and we're going to be talking about some other receivers as well. who maybe are more established, but we felt that he had the best path to really kind of come into his own.
Yeah, he definitely has one of the clearest paths to relevance and an increased workload of the guys we're going to talk about.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, Joe, so who do we have at number 3?
Yep, number 3, we've got wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, the San Francisco 49ers, and he's got increased opportunity because Deebo Samuel's no longer, which he's leaving behind 81 vacated targets. He had 51 receptions, 670 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And, Ricky Pearsall, he was getting a decent amount of buzz. Ultimately, he had a disappointing rookie season. I mean, he only played in 11 games. He had 46 targets, 31 yards, 400 touchdowns, 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, 400 touchdowns. Really impressive. But yeah, Ricky Pearsall is an interesting one. It'll be interesting to just see how the San Francisco 49ers offense shakes up. Brandon Ayuk should be coming back, and we'll see how he recovers from his injury. And then they got Juwan Jennings and then George Kittle. But then other than that, I mean, he should have some opportunities offense with Deebo gone.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, someone may, and we actually talked about it back and forth before we did this episode, thinking, does it make sense to have Pearsall after Corley? But really our big thing was there's still some decent players on this roster. You've got Brandon Ayuk coming back. You've got Juwan Jennings. You've got George Kittle. If you have a healthy Christian McCaffrey. So, I mean, where is Ricky Pearsall in the pecking order? He's probably 4 or 5. With Corley, he's number 2. Based on the pecking order. I guess if you count Breece Hall's receiving threat, maybe he's 3. But, at the end of the day, Pearsall's got a lot of talent. And obviously, had that gunshot, incident that happened that kind of took away from that training camp. Really showed towards the end, playing, I think pretty well. So, he could really rise here. And I think he's more of a sleeper. We talked about also Juwan Jennings. We thought Pearsall maybe fit the bill a little bit better based on what happened last season.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Jennings, too much production to be considered a sleeper at this point.
So for number 4, we're going to be talking about running back Javonte Williams, formerly of your Denver Broncos, now heading over to the Dallas Cowboys. And, the Dallas Cowboys got a lot of flack last year because they didn't address the running back position. And this is why we're doing this episode. I mean, you think about what happened. Everybody thought that the Cowboys were going to address the running back position. They didn't get any free agents. And they didn't get anybody in the draft. They went into the league with Rico Dowdle, and I guess they signed Zeke Elliott back. But, I mean, they really didn't they didn't really address the position. So this time around, it's a little bit different. They go ahead and they sign Javonte Williams. They also brought in Miles Sanders. Joe and I aren't that concerned about Javonte Williams, but, Rico Dowdle's no longer there. He had 235 carries. Ezekiel Elliott no longer there, 74 carries. So you're talking over 300 carries. Over 1,200 yards. They had 5 touchdowns, the 2 of them together. So this could be a real opportunity for Javonte, who, Joe, as you can speak to, was in a real timeshare in Denver. Really, besides his rookie year after that gruesome knee injury, really wasn't been given the opportunity that he was before.
Yeah, he wasn't, but I mean, he was also given plenty of opportunities and just hasn't shown to be the same guy after that injury, but we'll see. I mean, with a new blood and with Dallas, and if they don't really bring in another guy, I mean, I know you and I aren't scared off by Miles Sanders at all. I mean, he has the true opportunity to be the number 1 guy there. I mean, saw a guy like Rico Dowdle have really good stats last year. I mean, maybe Javonte is able to resurge his career and have a really productive season.
So, Joe, who do we have at number 5?
At number 5, we got tight end Brenton Strange of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, his opportunities, Evan Ingram is no longer. He's vacated 64 targets in the offense, and that was 64 targets over a 9-game span. And last year also, they didn't have Trevor Lawrence the full season. But Strange in the 17 games, he had 53 targets, 40 receptions, 411 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, we know Trevor Lawrence likes to target the tight end position. They also lost Christian Kirk in the offense, which is additional vacated targets there. And they've got, obviously they got Brian Thomas Jr. still have Gabe Davis in the offense. They also now have a guy that, we'll mention later, but they also have Dyami Brown there. So it'll
Joe,
be,
let the cat out of the bag.
well, trying to lay the land, Steve. But I do think Brenton Strange is interesting. I mean, he's a guy that I talked about in a past video. I think you and the other guests laughed at me when I brought him up as a potential guy just because I saw the path of Evan Ingram being cut off of this team as a cap casualty and leaving some opportunity for Strange if they don't go ahead and draft somebody.
Well, let's not forget, too, you mentioned about Evan Ingram. Look at the year prior. Over a 17-game season, he led the team in targets with a whopping 143 targets, had 963 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. So Trevor Lawrence has definitely shown that he's willing to give a lot of targets to the tight end position. And there's a lot of opportunity there. If they don't bring a lot of receiving threats into this team, obviously Brian Thomas Jr. is the guy. But there's going to be some other options there as well. So Strange steps right into that role. And, if I did laugh at you, Joe, you've got the final laugh because I was, because that's at the end of the day, this looks like a great opportunity for Strange.
Yeah, it really does. And it'll be interesting. I know Doug Peterson's style likes to be the tight end position. So I wonder if it was kind of his system leading to the tight end targets or if it truly is Trevor Lawrence. But we've also seen a guy like Cade Otton do pretty well with Liam Cohen last year too.
So at number 6, we're going to be talking about a guy who you may not know about, but we think that you probably should. And that's going to be wide receiver Tre Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders. He was third as far as targets go for the team with 81 targets, 47 catches, 539 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. Now, based on the quarterback play last year, you were dealing with Gardner Minshew, Desmond Ridder, and Aiden O'Connell. Now you got Geno Smith coming in, which I believe is a much more accurate passer than those other guys. Plus, we saw his ability to throw the deep ball with a guy like DK Metcalf. Now, Tre Tucker is a smaller guy, but he's got a lot of speed. That's why the Raiders wanted him in the first place, because of his ability to stretch the field. So if you look at the options, obviously you've got Brock Bowers there, but besides that wide receiver room is a wasteland. You've got Jacoby Myers, and that's pretty much it. They don't really have anybody in the running back room either that really has panned out. So, there's got to be a clear path for Tre Tucker, and with Geno Smith in the fold, I think you could take advantage of it.
Yeah, I definitely think you could take advantage of it, and we know Geno Smith also has the arm strength to take shots down the field, and with Tre Tucker's speed, I think that's going to match really well. And Tucker's a guy where if you did, catch some Las Vegas Raider games, he did flash when he got some opportunities. Didn't get a whole bunch of them, but when he did, I think he's a pretty interesting player.
Who do we got at number 7, Joe?
All right, at number 7, we got wide receiver Cedric Tillman with the Cleveland Browns, and they've had some changes. He's got some opportunities. Obviously, no more Amari Cooper. It's really him and Jerry Jeudy. And Cooper had, 53 targets in 6 games with the Browns, which is pretty good. And then Tillman, he had an interesting, once Jameis Winston took over and the Browns offense became more watchable and fun, he had 49 targets, 29 catches, 339 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So I think that was enough to kind of show the potential he could have. And I know the quarterback room looks bleak for the Cleveland Browns, but I know we were talking about this, Steve, and there is a path for Russell Wilson to come to this offense, and if he does, we know he likes to just throw those moon balls down the field to those big bodied guys. We've seen it, with Cortland Sutton, George Pickens last year. Could Tillman be that next guy?
Yeah, we saw Cedric Tillman's potential there over that 3-game stretch, where he had 12 targets, 8 catches for 81 yards, then 9 targets, 7 catches, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and then 11 targets, 6 catches, 75 yards, and a touchdown. So Tillman, really had a lot of, great opportunity. And if you look at the Browns, Joe, even, we don't know who the quarterback is. That's the toughest thing. I think that's one of the reasons why we had him a little bit lower on this list. Again, if we connected the dots, Russell Wilson could make some sense. But even Elijah Moore, a guy who's on that offense, 102 targets, vacated, gone. Amari Cooper, 53 targets. You mentioned him. He's gone, even though he didn't play a full year with the team. So, if they don't replace these receivers, It will depend on who the quarterback is, and Watson probably doesn't play the entire year, which is probably good for him. So is it Kenny Pickett? Is it another guy? Do they draft a guy? Who knows? But he has a great opportunity to really step in and be that second guy to Jerry Jeudy and really get a lot of opportunities. I mean, there is David Njoku there as well, so you have to contend with. But as far as paths go, he's one of the ones the best, and we've seen some glimmers of greatness from Cedric Tillman. All right, so for number 8, a guy who I honestly feel like you should be talking about because you are a big fan of this guy, and honestly, as you've talked about him with me, I become a bigger fan as well. So that's going to be tight end Theo Johnson. Had 43 targets, 29 catches, 331 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Took over at that tight end position after Darren Waller suddenly retired. But if you look at the team overall, they haven't really done too much in free agency. They still have the same cast of characters with Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. So, some would expect that they probably will, bring some type of player into that receiving room. But if not, Theo Johnson has a great opportunity. It's a big body target. We saw Jameis Winston. Really, if he ends up being the starter for them and they don't bring in another quarterback and he doesn't take over, we saw Jameis Winston pepper David Njoku with a ton of targets. And Theo Johnson's a very athletic guy, and the nice thing about him is he's a really good blocker, which would allow him to stay on the field all 3 downs.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it'd be a best case scenario for him if Jameis Winston is a starter. I think there's a chance maybe they go Shedeur Sanders and draft him. And to me, that'd be a little worrisome just because he likes to kind of take those shots down the field. And I feel like that would be more of the, Malik Neighbors route there. But nevertheless, I mean, hopefully, whatever happens there, it works out for Theo Johnson because I do think with his athleticism, he is a difference maker at the tight end position.
So you already alluded to number 9, Joe. So who is it?
Yeah, well, that's why it was fitting that I get to do this one, Steve. I let the cat out of the bag, and that's going to be wide receiver Dyami Brown of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Talked about all the vacated targets with Evan Ingram no longer in the offense, Christian Kirk no longer in the offense as well. And look, Dyami Brown, I mean, he was kind of a forgotten guy with the Commanders, never really got a heck of a lot of opportunities. But then last year, he had most amount of opportunities with 40 targets. He had 30 catches for 308 yards. Only 1 touchdown in 16 total games. But I think he showed last year just how he's kind of evolved as a wide receiver and maybe things are just clicking for him. And I think this was an interesting acquisition for the Jacksonville Jaguars to bring him in just because he's it gives them a bit of a different type of wide receiver than what they have in the wide receiver room already there. So I think with some increased opportunities, and he was never going to get a heck of a lot of volume in Washington. I think he's got a chance for some more volume in Jacksonville for sure.
Well, I think the exciting thing about him was just the potential. He's always had the potential. I mean, even,
right.
I remember Chris Sims from NBC Sports talking about I think he had him as the number 1 receiver, and people were like, what are you talking about as far as that?
Chris Sims does a lot of wacky things and gets a lot of flack for it.
He does. But what I'm going to mention about Dyami Brown is what he did in the playoffs. In the wild card round against the Buccaneers, he had 5 targets, 5 catches, 89 yards, and a touchdown. And then against the Detroit Lions, he had 8 targets, 6 catches for 98 yards. Now, he didn't do as well against Philly in the championship game. But what he was able to do, what's that?
Philly's one of the best defenses. They shut down a lot of receivers. So.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm just, we started to see the excitement with him. And somebody say, they don't believe in him, and you could go with a guy like Gabe Davis. I mean, either one of them could really have that opportunity. It's just you and I were a little bit – I mean, it's a new regime, a new head coach, new general manager. They didn't sign Gabe Davis to that contract, but they felt the need to go get Dyami Brown. And I want to say it was like 1 year, like wasn't it like $9 or $10 million? I want to say like it was pretty expensive.
Yeah, I don't think it was a cheapy deal. I do think it was quite substantial. I don't remember the exact amount, but I think
1 year, $10 million.
Yeah,
which is pretty substantial for a guy who really hasn't done all that much. With $5 million as a signing bonus and 9.5 guaranteed, almost fully guaranteed. So to me, why would they give a guy who really hasn't done all that much, and he's practically fully guaranteed at $10 million? To me, this is a new regime. They brought in this guy. So to me, he has a much bigger chance of being the second fiddle than Gabe Davis, who is, basically old news.
Yeah. No, I agree. I'm personally a lot more interested in Dyami Brown than Gabe Davis. I think Gabe Davis is just a guy that's never been able to stay healthy and kind of just that one-trick pony with the deep shots down the field.
All right, so for number 10, a guy who you probably should be talking about, but it's Denver Broncos.
No, because then you can't call me a homer. You can't talk about him.
Well, it's going to be wide receiver Marvin Mims, a guy who a friend of the podcast would tell you that is trash, so we won't reference his name. But when you think about Marvin Mims, he really started to show some flashes towards the end of the year, Joe. He had 52 targets, 39 catches, 6 touchdowns, 503 receiving yards. So I think he's a guy. Now, the Broncos have a lot of interesting receivers, so that kind of, makes it a little bit interesting. But, we saw what he was able to do here, especially the last 2 games of the year against the Chiefs and the Bengals, having 2 touchdowns each game.
Yeah, definitely. And I just, Sean Payton's talked about him a lot, said how, he's mentioned how much he likes Marvin Mims and kept mentioning like he's got to figure out a way to get him the ball. And towards the end of the year, we really saw that, like especially in the quick screen game early in games, they'd find ways to get it to him. And then they were taking some deep shots down the field to him. So I do think, he is interesting. And I think that is one of the, danger spots in the Broncos, whether maybe they add a veteran or do they draft, somebody that's a slot receiver, which could put, Marvin Mims's playing time in jeopardy a bit.
Because then he becomes more of a situational player or a gadget player. And and here's the thing, honestly, in this episode, we talked about who benefit the most from all this stuff, but they also have the most to lose. Like there's a flip side. We're being on the positive end, but they also have the most to lose. But honestly, if these guys don't have, per se, they don't have a lot to lose anyways, because you don't really have that much stock in them to begin with. So it's more so like these are sleepers to gain. But if, let's say, they did bring in like a Keenan Allen as a veteran free agent, or they drafted a rookie receiver, now Mims' value kind of goes down the tubes.
Yeah, because then it really goes down to, like you said, it would be those manufactured plays where more so like they were doing where they throw them in the backfield and let them do swing passes, and much more of just the low snap percentage and more of that, gadget type of player, as you mentioned.
So that does it for this episode. We talked about our consensus top 10 dynasty sleepers who we believe benefit most from the 2025 NFL draft and what these teams end up selecting. So these are guys that we'd recommend keep on your radar. And hey, like I said earlier on in the episode, if you want to be a gambler, knock yourself out, start acquiring these players, because I'm sure at least one of these guys, Joe, I don't think all these teams are going to address these needs, and one of them will have a great opportunity out of them.
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure some of these teams, or most of them, could, but there's going to be a couple out of these 10 players that they don't make that corresponding move, and what we're saying their opportunity is going to be there.
So that does it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.